What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for Sports. All right. So this is something that I've seen in a couple of comment sections out there, and I've seen it in my basketball chat group. Apparently, Detroit Pistons legend Isiah Thomas said something about Michael Jordan being helped by rule changes implemented by David Stern in the NBA and the NBA in the 1980s and 1990s, which helped him to win championships. Now, I couldn't find any articles out there where he said this, recent articles. I do know sometimes sports columnists and websites will regurgitate or recycle old news stories just to have something to talk about. Because I do know that he said this many, many years ago, that, starting in the 1980s, the NBA started slowly making changes to the rules that once helped the bigger, heavier, stronger players dominate the game. These rules then started slowly shifting to help perimeter players more and more and more. And he said these things helped Michael Jordan. Now look, do I dispute this? No, because I've been saying this for years, that the game used to be shifted toward the big man. Starting in the 40s and 50s, the best players were big men. George Mikan, Neil Johnston, Dolph Schayes. I'm talking about for the eras that they played in. They were all power forwards, centers. Bob Pettit, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain. Even the guards of that era, the more dominant ones, were big guards. Oscar Robertson. Sam Jones for his era was 6'4". Jerry West is for some reasons listed as 6'2", but Jerry West was more around 6'4", and I could even tell that from looking at footage that he was not 6'2". He was definitely taller than John Stockton, a lot taller. But anyway, you get my point. Willis Reed, Dave Cowens, Kareem, Gilmore, all of the great players, the dominant players, were either big for their size, Gervin, or they were power forwards and centers. But starting in the 80s into the 90s, you started seeing some changes. And a lot of this had to do with fans. Fans tend to root for players that they can relate to. Most fans can go out there and try to shoot threes, but most fans can't relate to being 6'11" and dunking the basketball and being, playing, center position, especially now the traditional center position, which has pretty much been evaporated. Even though Giannis is a gas of the past, blast from the past in a lot of ways. But anyway, let's get back on focus here. I'm not saying that what he said is wrong. I've been saying that. As a matter of fact, when I bring up that Curry and Dame Lillard and James Harden and Trae Young and all these guys are the culmination of these rule changes, I'm called a hater. But when Zeke brings it up with Michael Jordan, the people that don't like Michael Jordan, oh, he's telling the truth. Oh, that's real shit right there. Man, this process has been going on for quite some time. As a matter of fact, the Pistons, you could argue, were the first championship team, to be dominated by its backcourt. Matter of fact, they were. The Pistons were the first team to be dominated by the backcourt and not the front court, or at least not have it equal. The backcourt of Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas were the dominant half of that court, not the front court. So it's interesting that he talks about rule changes when his team was right there as well. His team was the beneficiary, the initial beneficiaries of these subtle changes in how the game was played. But anyway, did the NBA ever help Michael Jordan? Well, I'll put it like this: if you're saying did the NBA conspire to help Michael Jordan, I don't buy that shit, man. First of all, the Pistons had it in for Michael Jordan from the get-go. He used to dominate individually the Pistons all the time. He used to dominate them. I remember there was a game that came on in 1988 on CBS where Michael Jordan dropped 59 points on national television against the Pistons. Toward the end of the 86-87 season, he had a 61-point game against them. He had numerous games of 30 and 40 points against them. So much so that they had to devise what they called the Jordan rules. Right? Which was basically stop him from driving to the basket. Even if you got to cut him out of the fucking air. Block the lanes, try to prevent him from getting to the basket, make him shoot jump shots. And by the way, the Pistons were one of the top teams in the NBA that complained about Michael Jordan's free throws. In 86-87, the year that Michael averaged 37, he shot almost 1,000 free throws that season. The next year he shot, I believe it was 800, almost 900 free throws. But anyway, the point is, they've been complaining. They were complaining that he's getting way too many phantom calls. They would send tapes to the NBA league office of examples of where they thought Jordan was getting way too many beneficial calls. And as a result of that, starting in 87-88, his free throw attempts went down each season. Now, some of that was because of when Phil Jackson became head coach, Michael began to play more off the ball. Michael began to focus more on jump shooting. He was getting a little bit older, trying to preserve his body and not drive to the basket quite as much. But some of that was because of the influence of the complaints. He wasn't getting as many calls as he had, say, in the 80s when he first came to the league. He wasn't getting as many beneficial calls. So this shit goes both ways. I also want to make this point before I end this video. You know, some of the biggest changes the NBA made was with hand checking and bringing the three-point line in the 1990s. You know, they did away with hand checking in the mid-1990s, which actually is something they took out of, or they intended to remove back in 1979. But from what I remember, it was so difficult to determine whether a player was hand checking or whether or not a player may have been, whether the defender was hand checking or whether the player was acting or, exaggerating contact. So for another 15 years or so, more or less, players were still able to hand check. But they formally got away with it, did away with it in the mid-1990s. And this is when Michael Jordan was, for the most part, out of the NBA, or just coming back. They also brought the three-point line in to increase scoring on the perimeter because the NBA was trying to help perimeter offensive players be able to score more. Now that happened when Michael Jordan was out of the NBA. It had a reverse effect because scoring was going down, right? But it actually had a reverse effect because players who couldn't shoot now all of a sudden wanted to shoot threes. But it did not help with bringing scoring back up, nor did it really help with perimeter players shooting the ball better. But we did start seeing, as the game progressed in the 1990s, more offensively talented players on the perimeter. But that was more or less how the game was evolving. But starting in the mid-2000s, the NBA has made concerted efforts to open the game up for perimeter players. And this was after Michael Jordan was retired. Starting in 2005, 2006, that's when we started seeing rule changes to help offensive players be able to score at a higher efficiency and make it easier for them to score. And since the Steph Curry era, it's just gotten even easier. To the point where right now, I believe there are 6 players. There are 6 players averaging 30 points per game. And I think that's the most in the history of the NBA. If this keeps up, it's the most in the history of the NBA since the 61-62 season, where I think it was 5 players that averaged 30 points or more. So, yeah. Is there any truth to what Isiah Thomas is saying? Yeah, there's truth to that. That the NBA did make changes to help perimeter players. But I would argue that this was the result of the three-point line becoming more and more important in the NBA. This was also the result of a decline in the center position as far as the amount of talented centers coming into the NBA. The fact that big men were just not as marketable as smaller players. Most people are under 6'2", or at least under 6'3", so they can't relate to Shaq. They can't relate to the Tim Duncans as much as they can people who they perceive to be the same height as them. And their games, they can relate to players that can shoot threes. They can relate to being in the gym, shooting threes and all that. They can't relate to a big man. So these are factors. Marketing, of course, has something to do with it. But Michael Jordan didn't need any fucking help. Did these motherfuckers watch the guy play? He didn't need any fucking help winning titles. But I don't understand this obsession with, he only won because the rule changes. He only won because, the talent level wasn't that great. He only won because, get out of my face with this shit, please. At the end of the day, Isiah Thomas is a jealous, grudge-hearted motherfucker, man. He's just jealous of Michael Jordan's success. He's jealous because Michael Jordan is superior to him in almost everyone's eyes. He can't stand it. He can't stomach that. He does not accept the fact that he's not seen on the same level as a Larry Bird or a Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan. And I also want to say this too. I want to dispel all these fucking myths. The Pistons were not fucking old when the Bulls beat them. Okay? I'm sick of that fucking lie. They weren't fucking all of a sudden magically old. Isiah Thomas had just turned 30. Joe Dumars was 28. Dennis Rodman was a very young 29 or 30 years old. The only one that had some age on him was Bill Laimbeer, who was like 33. Most of those players were in their late 20s or around 30 or 31. Contrast that to the 98 Bulls. Jordan was 35, Robin was 37, Pippen was 32, Harper was 33, going on 34. Kukoc was damn near 30. So, nobody brings up age when it comes to the 98 Bulls, but all of a sudden, the Pistons were old. And if you want to bring up age, then why the fuck couldn't they beat the Lakers and Boston Celtics until, quote-unquote, they got old? Nobody brings that up. If you want to create this narrative that the Bulls were old, why couldn't they beat the Celtics until 1988? When they were starting to get old. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it, man. Tell me what you guys think.